This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward.
Hi, I'm Russ Capper, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. Today, our guest, Bill White, three-term mayor for the city of Houston, Texas, former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Energy, lawyer, entrepreneur, and now chairman of financial advisory and asset management firm Lazard Houston. All of that right after this.
Where will the energy come from to move us forward? From natural sources in abundant supply, or perhaps a man-made source? At NRG, we believe innovation will solve our energy needs. That's why NRG is moving away from fossil fuels towards wind, solar, and other sustainable technologies to power the smart grid, the electric car, and our clean energy future. We're using all of our energy to develop more of it.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show.
Hi, I'm Russ Capper, and welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. My guest today is Bill White, three-term mayor of the city of Houston, Texas, former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Energy, lawyer, entrepreneur, and now chairman of the financial advisory and asset management firm Lazard Houston. Bill, welcome to the Energy Maker Show.
Great to be with you.
Tell us about Lazard.
Well, great firm, international firm, kept its nose clean relative to a lot of investment banks, and building an energy practice here. It's an exciting time to be in energy. We'll talk about that. And Houston is really the hub of the international energy business, so there's great opportunities here.
It's extraordinary times. I sometimes think that we ought to have a national celebration. I contend that too many of the rank and file citizenry don't even know about it, but give us your perspective of what's happened.
Well, you know, I've been doing stuff in the energy business for over 37 years. Started out as a kid when the Arab oil embargo hit, doing models on world supply and demand for oil and the supply and demand for U.S. natural gas. According to all the models of the geoscientists, and I would say a consensus in the energy business just about 7 or 8 years ago, drilling productivity was down, reservoirs were depleting, and it looked like, you know, we were what they call in the business a mature province. That is, we had a lot of production, we could do some more, but these reservoirs deplete. What you've seen is extraordinary. You know, between 2010 and at least 2016 or 17, most of the additional oil produced in the planet Earth will be produced in the United States of America. Most of the additional hydrocarbons, when you consider most of the additional gas in the planet Earth, will be produced in the United States of America. Our increase in oil production will be more than the oil production of almost any nation, you know, aside from Saudi Arabia and about two others. So it's something extraordinary that's happening, and it's great for America.
I even hear sometimes that in Saudi Arabia, I mean, the Matt Simmons book, that even their reserves were decreasing substantially.
Oh, obvious. Well. I mean, you know what was happening. I'll tell you what was happening. And my friend Matt, many years, did catch it. I always used to say that energy and the amount of oil produced is a race between technology and depletion. And to use a fancy term that economists use, the result of that is indeterminate. In other words, somebody can't predict 7 or 8 years from now what the course of technology is. You can, however, predict that the big, giant oil fields where the reservoirs had natural pressure and permeability had been generally almost all found before the early 1970s. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't find new ones, and people drilled a lot to try to find those. And those reservoirs, they can be repressurized, but at some point, it's just a matter of physics, their production is going to decline. So with that in mind, and the amount of oil that we were consuming in the world, over two-thirds of the oil from those giant, massive reservoirs that have been, you know, discovered long in the past, the theory that we're going to have less and less oil produced peak oil
right.
seemed valid. As a matter of fact, somebody predicted in the late 1950s, a brilliant fellow predicted when it would peak and when it would go down. And when you put out what was actually happening, it was exactly on top of that. And so a logical mind would say that the guy probably knew what he was talking about. But then you line up natural gas and you line up oil, and there's an inflection point that's happened in the last several years. And we're the first major, mature place that's been drilled a lot before, province in the world, area in the world, set of basins in the world, where you've seen that dramatic reversal.
Well, it's exhilarating. Specifically, if you get into that category of shale gas, my goodness, it's abundant right now. It's inexpensive, and it's clean compared to alternatives. It's like the trifecta, man. I'm just desirous of the whole country realizing what's going on right now.
And it's happening with something that people didn't talk that much about. It's called gas condensate, which is almost like gasoline. It's a liquid form of natural gas. And natural gas liquids, which are feedstocks to petrochemicals. So look around this room, and everything that's not wood or steel is made with these products. And crude oil. The technology is being applied now to, nobody knew this could occur, but basically create what are called reservoirs, secondary reservoirs, where none existed, where there was just tight rock. It's fascinating. And the United States has an unbelievable advantage on this, because every year consistently for, about a century, few exceptions perhaps, but I don't even know there is an exception, there's more wells drilled in the United States than the rest of the planet combined. For a long time, we had more experienced petroleum engineers and geoscientists than the rest of the world combined. It's not true anymore, but we do have that base of experience that is unusual. We have pipeline infrastructure here. We have service companies. We have more rigs, land rigs, than the rest of the world combined. We have more seismic core samples, all the things you need to determine where the underground mapping of the United States is much more complete than anywhere else in the world. And because of that, we're in a fantastic position to take advantage of these new technologies, which can drill precisely not just through some layer of oil and gas, but inside that layer of oil and gas.
I had a recent guest on the show, Ron Boland of DA3 Co., and he compared the technology today. It's almost more like manufacturing when it comes to exploration and production, because we know right where it is. We know how to get it out, and you kind of can watch the market and determine when you need to go down and get it. And that's a huge change in the business, right?
That's a huge change in the business. And I know that a lot of people watch this show are very knowledgeable about energy. If there's some citizens who are not, and some who are, that does not mean necessarily that it is, shall we say, boom times for every oil and gas producer.
Right.
These new techniques are extremely capital intensive. They are extremely. They will require billions of dollars of investments. In finding, getting access to, extracting that resource, billions of dollars of gathering lines and surface facilities in order to bring it on. And people have found out in the last 6 months what I've said for a time, which is that it's just like anything. The airline industry has been, doubled in volume at least every decade since airplanes started flying people,
right.
But that doesn't mean you're going to be profitable.
That's true. Absolutely. Execution still matters.
And it's a supply and demand. If there's too much supply compared to the cost, then somebody's going to lose money.
Right, absolutely. All right, we'll be back with more with Bill White after this. This is the Energy Maker Show, heard on the radio and seen at TheEnergyMakers.com.
is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show.
This is the Energy Makers Show. Continuing on now with our guest today, Bill White. Well, Bill, this whole topic is so fascinating to me. I recently also interviewed Amy Myers-Jaffe at the Baker Institute, and she started talking about all the geopolitical ramifications of what's happening here in the United States, specifically with Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, all who seemed to be forecasting that they were going to be exporting gas to the United States. We were building these LNG terminals, and that's all changed as well.
Sometimes the word geopolitical scares me because it's an excuse for people in government to get involved with it. So, I mean, it's just, let's put it this way. We're producing a lot more oil and gas than people thought.
Right.
That means that we can reduce the balance of payments deficit on the trade accounts.
Right.
It means that there's going to be more employment in those industries in the United States. And if we combine that with continuing efforts to improve energy efficiency in vehicles and buildings, then we will become, if the price of energy goes up in the world, we will be less buffeted than those states which are dependent on imports.
Right. Geopolitical politics, the upcoming election. I mean, number one, it seems like that if the Republicans win, it will be a friendly energy world. And it's debatable, it still seems, on the Democratic side, only because they've been so invested in sustainable energy and in general seem to be averse to fossil fuels, even a cleaner one. I mean, sitting where you are today and advising, that must be a huge variable in what you recommend these days.
Not really. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time and worked with people in both administrations, and Republican and Democratic administrations, since the Ford administration. I was there when President Ford made his speech in '75. I was working for a congressman to deregulate oil and gas, where he declared energy independence as a national goal. So I've been around a little bit. And I will tell you that people in Washington, and especially in these industries, overstate the effect of Washington. I mean, Washington hadn't had much to do at anything with these shale oil plays, for example. I don't think it's the end of the world. I think we can improve our energy policy. I think, we need to do energy efficiency. We need more sustainable development. If you picked sort of some of the best, the emphasis on the clean aspects of natural gas for power generation that you've seen in the current administration, if you talk about removing silly barriers for development on federal lands, which are welcomed by the coastal communities in the Romney platform. If you combine the best of those, you'd have a better energy policy.
It was just a couple of weeks ago, the Department of Energy, even their kind of statistical people, pointed out that the CO2 emissions here was less than it had been in almost 20 years, and it was attributable to market conditions, which encouraged gas power plants to replace coal.
Absolutely.
I think that's just totally incredible.
I've given several speeches, including one big one to the GHP the last time, the region's business community, in my last year as mayor, saying that really the big thing that the industry ought to focus on, which is good for America, it's good for our region, it's good for everybody, is the potential for substituting natural gas for as a source of electrical power. We did that in the 1990s. We put together a broad-based coalition. It was bipartisan. We succeeded in making more inroads for markets for natural gas, took off restrictions in the use of natural gas that had been put in place in the 1970s. And so I see great potential. And it does depend on what happened, and it took people by surprise. Didn't take people in the power industry by surprise, but as soon as you get natural gas that goes below the cost of electrical power from coal-fired plants, the way our grid is set up, computers will trigger what is called the dispatch, the taking of every single kilowatt of gas-fired power there is available.
When you really step back and sort of take a look at it, in the things that you said about your history in the industry, is it wrong for Houston to be so excited about energy now, meaning that this industry goes through ups and downs big time? This one almost feels like it will stay forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I wouldn't ever put forever as a qualifier, but, as far as the eye can see, there's, prospects out there that can be exploited and drilled. That does not mean necessarily that every, upstream producer is going to make profits. I think there's going to be people who have financial issues and problems. I think whenever dry gas, what you call dry gas, pure methane, is a byproduct of liquids production, then there's going to be some, prices are going to be lower than a lot of people predict for some of that. But it does mean that there's fantastic opportunity for people of all ages in the industry. My youngest son worked as a rig hand on some rigs being reconditioned with crews for North Dakota, and I probably won't say how much he made, but it was competitive, and he just took off a summer from being a sophomore in high school. He's willing to learn, willing to work, willing to work outside, willing to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is what the thing, but they do pay overtime, and there's tremendous opportunity for young people in this country right now.
Oh yeah, the job creation thing is just huge.
And let me just put this out: if somebody says that they can't find a job anywhere, I just say, have you really looked in South Texas or North Dakota?
Right. Absolutely. Well, really cool. Now, but before I let you go, let's imagine that there's a group of Democrats and Republicans that are watching this interview right now, and they're impressed by what you're saying, and there's sort of this bipartisan group that says, "My God, we should make Bill White the energy czar of the United States of America." What would you do?
Well, the first thing I'd do is I'd make sure there wasn't an energy czar, because whenever you have it, if you set it up for one person and give anybody in the federal government that much power, it goes to their head, or they're replaced by somebody who it goes to their head. So that's not. But what should we do as a country? I think we need to stay the course in having more efficient fuel economy vehicles using some standards. I mean, we use standards for everything. For thank goodness the FDA has standards on the drug quality. Right. So every building, every house of every listener has to be built towards a building code, and we're moving towards more fuel efficient vehicles. I think that's critically important we retain. I think there ought to be some premium, not a big one, but some premium recognized an incentive for utilities to use cleaner fuels versus dirtier fuels in terms of air quality. I think that's important. I think it's a moral issue as well. And I think that we ought to look at everything that we can do to facilitate the responsible development consistent with what the local community wants for our hydrocarbon resources. And, liquid hydrocarbons are nature's most efficient way of storing mobile transportation fuels. I am an advocate for cost-competitive renewable resources. I think wind is still continuing to come down, by the way, as a resource. But, I'm not going to fly on an airplane that is powered by solar panels.
Sun might go away over a cloud or something. Which brings up another question. So that's sort of what you mean about subsidies, but then there's all this talk right now about changing the depreciation and the investment tax credit in some of these exploration companies. What's your opinion of that?
I think they're well-intended but misguided. When I served as deputy secretary, there were career Treasury officials that had been there for a long time, and they continue to be there. And my wife says this is too complicated, but they call something that's a loophole. Whenever the law is changed to reflect more cash accounting than GAAP accounting, that's not true. The way accounting works means that you can have a company that has very little positive cash flow, like most everybody in the exploration production business, net cash flow. compared to, say, something like, your big IT companies.
Right.
I mean, here you have Google, Intel, EMC. I could name about for Apple, Microsoft have $200 billion.
Right.
$200 billion of cash on their balance
right.
sheets. You don't have hardly any. I mean, it dwarfs the cash on the balance sheets of your oil and gas producers.
Right.
And the reason is they get to expense. Almost everything they do, and the oil and gas producers capitalize most of it. And the rules that are designed for oil and gas accounting with the depletion of these resources, these basically depreciation rules, are designed in order to recognize that you want people to be able to fund projects with their own internal cash flows.
Right.
They're not loopholes. You could say another way to put it is GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, allow you to compare certain things across industries, but every private equity firm, and I've been in private equity, or investor, a sophisticated investor, doesn't look at GAAP. They look at what your free cash flow is. And so the tax code, I think, needs to be a little bit more aligned, even more so than it is today, with what the free cash flow is rather than the GAAP accounting profits.
Well, I'm sure we have many in our audience that love to hear that. Bill, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective with us today.
It's great to be with you.
You bet. That's Bill White, Chairman of Lazard Houston. And this is the Energy Maker Show, heard on the radio and seen at TheEnergyMakers.com.